You're listening to Opera Box Score.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Wherever you are, however you're listening, it's America's talk radio show about opera. It's Opera Box Score. I'm Weston Williams, joined by Oliver Camacho and Matt Cummings. All right, this week, Sinéad Campbell Wallace goes inside the huddle. The Irish soprano shares how she began her career singing Handel and Mozart, then took a long break to start a family, and returned to singing as a Jugendliche, dramatische Sopran. With a Salome and an Elsa already under her belt, she is making her American debut as Leonora in Washington National Opera's Fidelio. And then a field report on the Tales of Hoffmann from the Met, starring friends of the show Benjamin Bernheim and Erin Morley. Plus, in the 2-minute drill, what's the playbook for keeping an opera company afloat in troubled times? Glyndebourne and Atlanta apparently have the secret sauce. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast on Spotify. Click follow on Apple Podcasts. Hit the plus sign. Send us a voice memo or email us your hot takes, mailbag at operaboxscore.com, or just record your thoughts using the You Got Something to Say tab on our website, operaboxscore.com. However you contribute, you'll get an OBS beer coaster, an OBS lapel pin, and a #1 OBS fan foam finger just for sharing your own hot take. Oliver Camacho, how's life?
Secret sauce is a sports term, right?
It can be.
I think so.
With as many endorsements as McDonald's gives out, I think that they count as sports at this point.
We need to start endorsing athletes. Like, we need to find our favorite athlete and get them to wear the OBS lapel pin or something like that. But I just want to say, since we recorded last week, the Beijing, or I should say the China Open in Beijing, did conclude with Coco Gauff winning the women's title, finding her form with a new coach. And now they're in the middle of the Shanghai Open. It's really weird in this back end of the season where all these tournaments start happening in like different hemispheres. And I don't know when to turn on my TV, but apparently, everybody is doing fine and well in Shanghai, and Carlos Alcaraz is set to meet Jannik Sinner if they each make it to the final. And once again, the Beijing final between those two was maybe one of the best matches of the year. We're hoping for a repeat.
What the worst match of the year was for me was the Tide getting rolled over by unranked Vanderbilt University. This was a pretty rough, upset-filled week for college football. George, his number 8 ranked Michigan lost to Washington. Ashley's also unranked Arkansas managed to bump off Tennessee. I don't understand what's going on. Matt Cummings, can you help me?
You're knocking on the wrong door.
Well, Matt, what good are you then? Is this why you're never on the show?
Yes, I ran away and only come back when it's an episode of the He-Man Woman Haters Club, where we start off by talking about women's tennis successes.
You know what? That's completely fair. It's about time. And, I don't really want to talk about college football this past week anyway. Let's talk some opera.
Huddle up. Let's go inside the huddle.
Beethoven's Fidelio opens at Washington National Opera in the Francesca Zambello production on October 25th through November 4th, and it features the American debut of Irish soprano Sinéad Campbell Wallace. I'm currently obsessed with Fidelio, and I saw that they were doing it at WNO, and was really lucky to be able to talk to Sinéad before we go into this conversation, which is a robust interview, and we hear her whole story about how she started off as a light lyric and had some babies, and suddenly she's singing Salome. Before we go into that, here's a little bit of Sinéad singing the Shardash from Die Fledermaus just a few years ago with the RTE Concert Orchestra in Dublin. Sinéad Campbell Wallace, welcome to Opera Box Score. This interview is going to serve as, I think for a lot of people, an introduction to you. You're an Irish artist, and this is your American debut at Washington National Opera, correct?
That is correct. I mean, what a debut, right?
I know.
Yeah.
You're singing Leonora and Fidelio, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. But when I was looking at your, CV, I noticed that you used to sing with Christian Kernan and the Classical Opera Company. I was like, wait a second. Christian Kernan doesn't conduct Strauss and Wagner. What do we got going on over here?
Yeah.
So I guess earlier in your career, you were more of a lighter lyric, or maybe we could just call you a lyric soprano. And this Leonora is definitely signaling Jugendliche, dramatische repertoire. And I already see that you've sung The Empress and Frau. So maybe you're just full on dramatic now?
Well, it's yeah. I mean, I'm sort of I feel dramatic, and yet as a dramatic soprano, when you say you're a dramatic soprano, you say it and then you're kind of wincing a little bit because there's always that thing in your head is like, but am I a dramatic soprano? But yeah, definitely. I mean, I also had my Wagner debut last October in Paris. I sang Elsa at the Paris National Opera, and that was like my first Wagner role in Lohengrin. And I also repeated it then in Savonlinna Festival in the summer. And I'm debuting Zenta in Fliegende Holländer later this season. So I'm definitely at this stage, like, yeah, bona fide, like dramatic soprano.
Well, this is a topic I'd like to talk about. We don't get to talk with many dramatic sopranos here, and we've had Christine Goerke as a guest before, but she's like, she's just hilarious. So we could talk about so many things with her, but when I was in conservatory age, I remember being around a lot of young singers who assumed they were dramatic sopranos because their voice didn't have flexibility, or they didn't maybe have, control over the volume of how they sang and whatnot. And just like, oh, my voice is too big to sing Mozart. And it's like, sure, maybe your teacher's telling you that, maybe you just, whatever. I don't want to disparage anybody, but it seems like your path wasn't that you were a dramatic soprano to start. Can you talk about how your voice changed over these, past 10 years?
Sure. Yeah. So, yeah, as you say, when I started studying, so I did my undergrad in Dublin, and then I went to the National Opera Studio in London. And then sort of after that started to work in primarily really in the UK and in Ireland. And yeah, like my speciality at the time was definitely Handel operas, and I did some Mozart as well. I did Monteverdi, and I did a little bit of bel canto. Like I think I did Giulietta in I Capuletti Montecchi, but that was sort of the height of it, like that was sort of as big as I got at that stage. And I think it was just there is this issue about, because my voice was substantial. But I guess, when you're in your early kind of mid-20s, early 20s, like, it's sort of, it was in my kind of DNA. And I think in every young singer's DNA, that you have to sing Mozart. Like, you're right, like that's, and people often say, before you do anything, once you can sing Mozart, you can sing anything. And I think there's a little bit of truth in that, in the sense that, you do have to have some kind of agility and versatility in your voice, no matter what size your voice is. And funnily enough, funny that you should mention Christine Goerke, because Christine and I did a concert performances of Electra last year in Tokyo, where she sang Electra and I was Chrysothemis, and we got on like a house on fire. But we had this conversation, because Christine, when she started, believe it or not, shock horror, she was singing Handel and Mozart
and Gluck, yeah.
And I believe that her sort of kind of earlier roles at the Met were indeed Handel. I think she sang Alcina, and I think she sang Contessa, Marriage of Figures, that kind of thing. She may have also sung Fiordiligi. Anyway, and then she and I had this conversation. So when I was singing those roles as well, they were okay. They were comfortable to a point. But then there was always a sense that eventually I felt like I was being contained,
Hmm.
like, so conductors would start to go, oh, you need to give less, or you need to do less, and I think at that point, that's when it becomes dangerous, or that's when it becomes uncomfortable, because you're not being allowed to give the extent of what you have. And when any voice is sort of stymied in that way, I think any singer should kind of start, okay, it's an alarm bells moment where it's like, okay, this isn't healthy anymore. And I felt that to a certain extent. Um, I just felt like it was, yeah, that I wasn't particularly, I didn't feel particularly, it didn't feel rewarding to sing that
Hmm.
music. I enjoyed it, and I absolutely love Handel to this day. I absolutely love it. But I felt like I couldn't sing, I guess, with everything that I had. But around that time, I got married, and I always knew that I wanted to have children if I was lucky enough to do so. And at that stage, I decided to call it a day, more or less, with the career. So I left my management. We moved to Ireland. We had been living in London, and when I moved home, very luckily, was pregnant with my daughter. I got a full-time job in the Conservatory of Music in Dublin, and I taught like full time. And I did that for about 6 years. So I had my daughter. 3 years later, I had my son, and I was pretty happy teaching. I really enjoyed it. Up until that point, I was enjoying it. I was really, the whole physiognomy of the voice and the biology and the science behind it. Absolutely, just, I'm just so interested in it. It really, kind of fuels my creative process in a completely different way. So I was doing that and really enjoying it. And then a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, Aoife O'Sullivan, who studied in America, actually studied in the Curtis Institute, a very beautiful Irish pianist. She was also teaching there, and she said, "You know what? We should do a recital." So I was like, "Yeah, sure." And I guess I that was the first sort of time where I started sort of having to work at it again, and get a program up and running, and and then that led to one or two other projects, sort of low key, in Dublin, a couple of other performances, and I guess I got bitten by the bug again, if you want to call it that. But I remember saying to Eva, like, God, maybe I should get back into performing, like, seriously, in a serious way. And yeah, so that was kind of the start of my journey. And of course, once I got that into my head, that was it. I thought, okay, I'm gonna really make a go of this. I took a job share in my job, which meant it freed up some time. So I started retraining. I have a amazing teacher in London called Janice Chapman, and went back over to her and said, okay, this is, I'm interested in doing this. What do you think? And she said, well, okay, it's going to be hard work. Because at that stage, I'm coming back into a career in my sort of early 30s or whatever, and she was like, nobody's going to remember who you are. It's going to be like starting from scratch. But then when I started, working with her, it became very clear very quickly that I was now the owner of a very different instrument, than I had been in my early 20s. So this kind of manifested itself. The way I kind of describe it to people is that it's like you're driving, right? But you're driving, whereas before you were driving like a little zippy, like mini or whatever. And now all of a sudden I felt like I was driving like a big 4x4, like a Range Rover.
Like an American.
Yeah, exactly. Um, so yeah, so it felt different. The gear changes felt different. Everything felt a little bit slower at the start. Um, But at the same time, it was really exciting because all of a sudden it was like, oh, wow, well, this opens up a completely different, series of roles and a different trajectory vocally. And to be honest, I think that's what really spurred me on because it's a tough business. It's a tough industry. We know this. And, I think if I had gone back into the business with the voice that I had, I'm not sure how successful I would have been, because there's always so many absolutely amazing young light lyric and lyric sopranos. So, the fact that I had this dramatic spinto quality, I was like, okay, this is doable. Maybe this is more nichey and maybe this is going to work out better. And yeah, so it was literally back to the drawing board. As I said, I had left my management. So I was back emailing, hi, anybody that I had any connection with in the business before, saying, remember me? and a lot of people I spoke to were like, oh my God, are you sure about this? This sounds crazy. But if by all means, give it a go. And I was just absolutely relentless in kind of emailing, and I got so many, I was emailing agents everywhere with kind of recordings that I had made, and saying, are you interested in in this kind of early 30s soprano, and they were like, I don't think so.
Wow, I mean, the audience can't see you because this is an audio format, but you are a stunningly beautiful woman.
Oh.
And no, it's like, why would it even matter how old you are? Because I just want to watch you, it's like, and I'm as gay as a goose, so don't be scared.
That's very, very kind of you. And, what time is it now? 11:45, you've made my day. So that's my day done and dusted. Fantastic. But no, I thank you for that. But you do have this, the industry can be sexist, can be ageist, can be fattest, can be body shape. We know all this. So I suppose I had it in my head that it was going to be tough, right? Either way. So, and then really out of the blue, I had emailed this lovely German agent, and he said, okay, come and sing, come over and audition. So I did. And he said, look, I'll keep you in mind if anything comes up. And I sort of forgot about it. And literally 4 or 5 months later, I got an email for him, and he said, they're looking for a soprano for a short fest contract in Regensburg in Germany, which is this tiny little house about an hour from Munich, in the most beautiful city you could imagine. And they were looking for a soprano to sing Agatha in Freischütz, First Lady in Zauberflöte, and Tosca, primarily. And there were also some other roles as well, but certainly the Agatha and the Tosca were really interesting for me. And so I went over, auditioned, and sort of like you would imagine or dream about, the intendant called me into his office straight after the audition and said, we want you here, please come, how can we help get you here, so it was initially a 2-year contract. Eventually I could only commit to a year because I had my children, and they, for various reasons, stayed in Ireland. So they were there with my husband at the time and my parents. The Opera House were amazing in, facilitating me to go home whenever I could. So I was going home for a weekend here, and the kids were coming out for their breaks. And it was really hard. I think around March, so from September to March, it was really kind of full on. And then in March, the workload lessened and I was able to get back, a lot more. But that was kind of my real hardcore commitment, I guess, because I think a lot of people were like, oh well, I guess in my head I was like, can I do this? Can I go and be away from my children for that long, even though I was getting back. And looking back on it now, it was kind of like, a learning curve because, you know, it was a taste of how it is for a working mom in this
Yeah.
business, because you are away a lot and there's no, you know, there's no getting around it. There's no easy way to like package it.
Are your kids with you here in the
They're
US right now?
not,
Okay.
unfortunately. No, they're not. And the reason being, they do come. They usually come for, you know, for a period of time whenever I'm away. This time, my daughter has just started secondary school in September. And so now it's really tough to take her out of school. Whereas
Mhm.
in primary school, you can kind of, you know, you can take them out.
Yeah, we don't know what that means in the US. Secondary, what age is that?
I guess it's high school. Would it be
Oh,
high
okay,
school?
yeah,
It's like she's
okay.
12. She's turning 13.
Oh, that makes no sense. I thought you were in your 30s, but maybe you're not in your 30s anymore?
Oh, no, I'm not in my 30s.
Oh, okay. Then I'm confused. You're still beautiful. Okay. Sinead, I have to stop you because I recognize that in that story you just told us from taking a break from singing and going to teaching and then rediscovering your instrument, you have inspired so many different topics that the audience is going to be desperate that I ask you about, namely how teaching helped you discover maybe your bigger voice, what it's like to, you know, have a re-go at the career at age 30, whatever that was, trusting a teacher, trusting a coach to hear you better than you can hear yourself, and learning new repertoire and what that feels like compared to the singing you were doing. I mean, I think of Handel and Mozart as people who really understood the voice and wanted the voice to be brilliant, but also understood the limitations of a bel canto technique, whereas the roles you're singing now are pushing the voice towards heroic things that have nothing to do with bel canto. And then the other topic would be, how did you do that for a year? Like, what type of support system did you have? It sounded like Regensburg was amazing, but how do you separate? I mean, I'm almost going to start crying thinking about what it must have felt like for you to go after your passion, but also know that you were leaving your children.
Mhm.
It's so there's just too many topics there. And we only have about 12 minutes left. Is there one of those things do you feel very passionate you'd like to talk about before we move on?
We need to do like a series.
I know. Is there one topic in that jumble there do you feel like you really would like to address?
Actually, funny enough, what you brought up there about trust and about a support system and about, you know, my voice and the teaching, and I think that's really important because, as I said, I was lucky enough in my when I was studying to find this amazing teacher in London who was basically like she's like a singing doctor, you know, like she's really into the science behind everything. And she taught me my technique, and to this day, I do believe if I hadn't did that groundwork with her, it wouldn't have been as easy as it was if not as easy, but you know what I mean. I wouldn't have had the resources and then following on from that, the 6 years that I spent teaching day in, day out, and I was taking students from, you know, it was undergrad, so they were coming in at 18 and then graduating at 22, or I had master students coming in and at 23 and 24, and you know, bringing them through a master's performance over 2 years, and to be honest, during that time is when I learned to sing properly. So because I had to problem solve every single day with these students, and so I would do it myself. So I would like, why can't she do what's she doing there? And I'd do it myself. I could sing it myself and go, what would I do? And so the teaching was such a learning curve. And I'd also sometimes check in with Janice, with my teacher, and go, you know, I'm having this problem. This student is bland. What do you think? And she'd email back and say, well, you could try this and try this, whatever. And so, you know, I was lucky. It sounds strange, but I was lucky that I had that time to formulate and to discover and to sort of grow a technique and the time as well, because as a singer you're working non-stop, like you're working all the time, you're learning roles all the time. You know, you don't have time for weeks on end to be like, I wonder, should I lift my tongue slightly high? You know what I mean? Like you don't have, I guess I had the luxury of those years to really sort of nail down a technique. And then once I got back into the business, I had people that I called on, or that I would call on to question, to sort of discuss something, and I worked with really good coaches, both in Munich and in London, on these sort of, and they're good soundboards, they're good, like they can hear something, they'll say, oh, I don't know what that is, but do something else because it doesn't sound right, or it doesn't sound as good as the phrase before. It's not linking up properly. But then it's up to you as the singer to know how to fix that. Okay. So, and I think that's where I was lucky, as I said, to have that. So the answer to your question is, like, the support system was there, but I was I suppose, my own worst critic on the one hand, but also I had the resources, I felt, to fix problems or to fix issues, or to I was so attuned to listening to those students over those 6 years, they and hearing them develop, and finding out what was, getting feedback from them, what's helping, what's not helping, what feels good, what doesn't feel good, and then implementing that myself. I think that was like huge for me, and I guess in that sense, I'm sort of my own teacher. Of course, I have people I can rely on, and certainly in terms of, I record myself singing like all the time, and I listen back to it and I correct things, and then I will send that to somebody else and go, "Do you hear that? Well, what am I hearing? Are you hearing what I'm hearing?" So I'm sort of on it all the time, because I think you have to be, and yeah, so I was, it was kind of a lucky kind of an event that happened. My life sort of went down one road, and I didn't know if I was ever going to get back into singing when I left. But funnily enough, what ensued in those years was going to be like the bedrock of my career thereafter. So it's, yeah.
Well, I've invited you on because we're supposed to be talking about Fidelio, but I just wanted to oh God, we have so little time now, but it sounds like you are a very thoughtful technical singer, and I haven't seen you perform yet, but I know from our pre-interview that you've already debuted a Salome, and I feel like if you're singing Salome, you've got to be focused on your physical presentation, got to be focused on the acting.
Yes. Absolutely. So the reason the reason the technique is important, right, is because once you have one of those, you can throw everything out of the window when you get on a stage, and you can do what the hell you want. If you want to do a cartwheel and sing, you can do it. If you want to, if a director asks you, oh, can you hang this way? Can you sing lying down? Then can you sing that note, stand on your head? Okay, you're not going to do that. But the point is that with the technique, you can physically do whatever you need to be able to do, and you don't have to think about it. So when I'm on stage singing Salome, I am like 100% Salome. I'm Sinead singing the role, and there's pretty much 80% of me in anything I sing anyway, because I have the right amount of crazy, I think, and but the technique then emboldens you to you can do, you don't have to think, oh God, I can't do that, and oh, I need to stand this way, or I can't do that and then do this. It's like, if your technique is solid, you can do whatever you want, and it gives you the freedom. It gives you such freedom then to be able to go, well, I can really enjoy this. I can throw myself physically into this, and I'm going to be okay, because I have something behind, a backbone of a technique that's sort of unshakable.
Have you done any character studies of women dressed as men, and like how to walk like you might have something between your legs, and like shoulders back type of stuff?
Yes, I did actually. The first time I did Fidelio, we had a lovely movement coach, and she said, I know it sounds strange, but just go with me on this. Roll up a pair of socks and put them down the front of your pants. And I was like, what? And she was like, it just gives you that sense of like, there's something there. It makes you move differently. It makes you think differently, makes you walk differently. And I thought, God, this lady's crazy. But anyway, I did it. And she was absolutely right. It just changes everything. I don't do that in rehearsals. Everyone will be glad to know. But it does just give you a little insight into, into the different way that we move, obviously, So I did do a little bit of that early on. And it is fascinating that the trouser roll thing, mezzos do it a hell of a lot more than sopranos do. Mm-hmm. But it is, it is fascinating. It's another challenge, I guess, which is great. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask you about what it's like working in the US versus working in Europe, but I realized since this is your US debut, you only have experience in this Francesca Zambello production, and Francesca Zambello is a friend of the show. And so we sort of know how she works and how she likes to create an environment that is very welcoming to families and pro everybody, very inclusive. Have you noticed any of that at WNO?
Yeah, 100%. So I had been in touch with Christine Gerke, who we spoke about, and I had said, I'm going to Washington and I'm going to be working with Francesca Zambello. And she was like, oh my God, you are going to absolutely love her. And she is wonderful. She's a wonderful person. I love her energy. I love her commitment. And certainly the atmosphere in the rehearsal room. We started rehearsing. We've done a week now of rehearsals, and it's just so, like you say, it's inclusive. It's welcoming. It's also got enough sort of laconic, sort of laid back fun as well, and a little bit of it's a nice atmosphere. It's not it's not too wholesome, but she's got a really good balance. The production is going to be fantastic. It's of course set in a prison. We've seen photography of we've seen models of the set and costumes. And it's going to be wonderful. Francesca really focuses, which is slightly different actually to Europe. A lot of European directors, I guess. She focuses on the character, so it's character driven. This opera is like character driven, so it's about each personality, each character, the interactions between the characters, the journey of the personalities in the piece. So it's not about props. It's not about a million different things going on stage at once. I mean, I did a production last year with a director, and I felt like the singers were like props. We were stood, and while we were surrounded by dancers, actors, things flying in, things being rolled onto stage.
You can't act, so let's put all the focus elsewhere.
Oh my God, absolutely. Singers obviously can't. He had believed, I think, singers couldn't act, and therefore just had to like throw the kitchen sink at this production. Yeah. And I kind of felt, hang on a sec, that's not how this should work, surely. Yeah. So differently, a sort of if Francesca is all about the singer, she's all about the character. And so I'm really enjoying that. I'm really enjoying that journey. She is a powerhouse of a woman herself. She's strong. She's incredibly clever, independent, and all of that. So of course, I love that. I also feel like I'm that woman, and I'm sure most of us are. So it's great to be working on Fidelio, with being directed by that woman. So yeah.
Just one final thought on Fidelio and Leonora. After hearing your personal story, I'm already imagining Sinéad Campbell Wallace, Leonora, singing to Sinéad Campbell Wallace, Marcellina. Like, that's what I was, when I was.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's so strange, to be in a show like that where, yes, you would have been the light lyric or the lyric soprano. And also the fascinating thing about this particular production is Leonora and Florestan have 2 children. So we have children in the show. During the overture, you see them with their 2 children. So I'm also a mother in this show. So I've left my children to go and find yeah. So it's really like, yeah, it cuts to the bone, this one for me. She's going to find her husband to rescue him, so that they can be, a family again. So it's very, very close to my heart. I'm living it. I live this role anyway because I suppose I feel women in general, we have to do much more. We have to go much further. We have to do 10 times more than a man does to achieve our goals and to achieve our success and to achieve what we want, simply from the constructs of our culture and the constructs of society. And so, yeah, for me to be singing a role like this, and the way that Francesca has envisaged it is like, it's like a dream. It's amazing.
Is it very satisfying to Tod sein Weib? Or do you feel like Leonora is terrified? What is your Leonora experiencing in that moment?
I think she's willing to, I think she's willing to do whatever she has to, it's that thing of like your energy and your belief system and your principles are going beyond you as a woman at some
you're lifting a car in that moment.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's like she is superhuman. She's got like her strength and her power and her beliefs are they're going beyond everything. So it's a very, very powerful moment, and indeed the whole role is, and she's such an amazing mix of power and strength, and yet she's got this vulnerability, and obviously in this production she's a mom of 2 kids, so it's tapping into the whole amazing gamut of like what it is to be a woman, I guess, and a mom.
Abscheulicher, sung by Sinéad Campbell Wallace with pianist Aoife O'Sullivan. My thanks to the PR team at Washington National Opera for connecting us with Sinéad. Once again, Fidelio opens October 25th. I know you guys didn't get a chance to hear that interview, but she does talk about how, she basically retired from singing to start a family. And she was working as a teacher, and in the course of teaching her students was just reminded constantly about technique. And one of her colleagues asked if she would put together a recital, and in working on the recital just started to feel all these new things, post having 2 children. And now she's got this second career where she's singing big girl roles. And it just made me think, who are the other singers that we know that, their voices changed in a major way, not because of age, but because just something happened. There was like a shift. And I thought about Lucia Pope, but I would have to say that Lucia Pope, who began singing like, Queen of the Night and very, light lyric stuff, it was a much more gradual change into more like Strauss.
Right. And then she was singing like Elizabeth and Tannhäuser by the end of by the end of her life.
But that was a more gradual change. Can you think of ones that maybe had a more dramatic shift?
I mean, the trajectory you're describing sounds very similar to the stories that we were reading about Christine Goerke recently, who's
brought up in this interview, actually.
Yeah. So. But she's not the only like big dramatic voice shift. Like, it's shocking to think that Marilyn Horne and Regina Resnick both started out their early careers as sopranos, since they like really are the queens of the basement.
Very much so.
The other very, very famous example is that Joan Sutherland was training to be a Wagnerian soprano, and then it turns out that she had like a whole fifth on top of her voice, beyond what any of those operas call for, that were some of her best notes. And so then she retrained as the dramatic coloratura for a while. And then on the borderline, you get a lot of those like very high dramatic mezzos who successfully sing soprano rep, like Hall of Famer Christa Ludwig, or Waltraud Meyer sang a lot of the same, like both mezzo and soprano roles. My Bay, Shirley Verrett, of course, and Grace Bumbry as well. Really bridged that gap in a way that was more comprehensive than just like trying on a soprano part for size.
But they were able to do both Fox for their entire career. I mean, once they decided they could sing soprano stuff, that they didn't abandon their mezzo rep.
No, not in the same way as like Regina Resnick stopped singing soprano rep by the time like a couple years into her career.
Then we have Carla Bergonzi, who started as a baritone, and we had that interview with Brad Sisk, who was a student of Carla Bergonzi, and he curated a playlist for my radio show, and he shared with me the first commercial recording that Bergonzi made, or one of the early commercial recordings that Bergonzi made as a tenor, which was Canio, of all things. And he says if you listen to the way Bergonzi sings at that point in his career, you really can hear a more throaty sound that's related to his baritone singing. And then it became more elegant the longer he stuck with it as a tenor.
Some other dramatic tenors also, like Ramon Vinay or Seth Svanholm, started training as baritones as well, but then kind of moved into that Helton tenor repertoire, which again, like, does sit lower than a lot of the Italianate stuff. But Ramon Vinay, I think, is the only singer to have been recorded singing both Otello and Iago. But don't give Mr. Operalia any ideas.
We shall not speak his name. I think we could also add to the list, of course, when I was famously in elementary school, I was in my citywide choir, and I was the second highest soprano in the entire school system. And now look at me.
Yes, a change that only you have gone through.
Yeah.
Let's move the focus away from me and take a look in the listener mailbag.
Yeah, you got something to say? Then yeah, all right, you can say something. This is listener mailbag.
Hello, operaboxscore. It's PJ, just finishing Le Conte d'Hoffmann. My word, I have not seen this opera before, although I had written a paper at the University of Michigan about an opera called La Pericole, an opera comique done by Jacques Offenbach, the same author. And in this case, it's a full, beautiful, big scale production. Although it was unfinished at the point of his death, it was revised and worked on by many people until they finally settled on the version that I think we're seeing today. The cast was stunning. Hoffmann was Benjamin Bernheim, who I had just seen in the spring in Romeo and Juliet. My God, so good. Erin Morley, who seems to have defined herself by this role of Olympia, brought the house down repeatedly. Pretty Yende was Stella, and Antonia, wow, just a gorgeous rendition. I've never seen Pretty Yende sing before. Clémentine Margaine was Giulietta. Lovely job. We were all very impressed. And then we also had Christian Van Horn, who is, I think, a friend of the show, was just stunning in the role of 4 different evil villains throughout. We also had the Muse, who I had not seen before. She was amazing. Vasilisa Berzhanskaya. Wow. We really were blown away. What a commanding presence she was. This was a classic day at the opera in this case. The first act, where we see the automaton and we see Erin Morley's rendition of the automaton, was equal to anything I've ever seen at the Met. It's up there with La Bohème, the second scene in La Bohème. It's up there with maybe the greatness of some of the scenes in Akhenaten, maybe the conclusion of Dialogue of the Carmelites. It's big and bold and crazy and wild, and I was just super impressed with that scene. This is a production that's been around for a while. I just have never seen it. I've wanted to see the Tales of Hoffmann for all my life, and here I am on a gorgeous Saturday afternoon. One note about the people around me. It was so interesting. It was such a New York experience. I had Maria to my left, used to work at ASCAP, devoted to the opera, although it's relatively new in her life. Within the last 5 years, she's found the opera. And then there was Bill, who was one seat over to my right. He was a stage manager at City Opera for the longest time, and in fact he's in his 80s, comes to the opera all the time. He takes advantage of the $25 seats. He has seen the Tales of Hoffmann 15, 20 times. He was telling us stories of Beverly Sills in that role and all the versions that he's seen. That was really, really fun. And then another lady to my 2 seats over, her friend was flying in from a French magazine to interview Benjamin Bernheim while he's in this production here. And then another person that I met in intermission, her friend is the director of the Met broadcasts. So all around me were all these interesting stories, just chatting with people at the various intermissions. Super fun. It's just, I guess, another time in the Metropolitan Opera. So signing off, this is PJ from the Metropolitan Opera here in New York.
I just want to take a second here to talk about Tales of Hoffmann, because one day I think it's going to be one of our Hall of Fame shows when we need some content. I love this show so much.
I really do.
It might be in my top 10 all-time favorite operas. I really love the story that you can tell if you put the acts in the right order. If you start with Antonia and then you start with Olympia, then go to Antonia, and then go to Giulietta in that order.
Right, which is rarely the order that it's done in, but it is the correct one.
Yeah. And if you keep the septet, which I guess Offenbach didn't write. I love that thing in the Giulietta act. The Giulietta act, I have to say, is a mess, but it's good that it's a mess because I think the alcoholism is like so far gone, you know? And I love the sort of like non-gender role of the muse / Niklaus. And PJ, just so you know, Vasilisa Verzhanskaya sang Cenerentola here in Chicago last season. So we've all had a chance to experience her. Something strange that I learned about Vasilisa is that she's already sung the role of Norma, which makes zero sense.
Oh, add her to that list from earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it doesn't make any sense. That's just like a complete random. It's like Cecilia Bartoli singing
I was going to say,
it's like, yeah,
which she did record.
Yeah, and it's great, but it's not what you're thinking it's going to sound like.
Right.
It's like chamber Norma, you know. So
Normenta.
Yeah. What did you want to say about Tales of Hoffmann, Matt?
You just get such a wide variety of vocal writing, which is like really, really exciting when you have one singer who can sing all 3 of the heroines, but it really doesn't take anything away from me to break it up into 3 different roles either. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because they just ask for such totally different things. And I would rather hear like universally excellent singing across the evening than one person who can do like 1, 2, 2.5 of them really well and then have to struggle through the end of the third one.
It's such a dramatically exciting piece. And I feel like with a lot of like traditional, warhorse operas, they tend to be very traditional in form. You're receiving one cohesive story that often, fits into a pretty standard sort of, setup that would have appealed to 19th century audiences. But I love the sort of 4 stories in one aspect. I love how each one's very different and you can get really weird with it, but also very sincere with it.
Right. It's like if you took 3 or 4 different Goosebumps books and put them together
really
in one
feels
opera.
like
I mean, like a little bit more highbrow than that, but like not that much more highbrow than that.
Yeah.
They are kooky, creepy, goofy stories.
Yeah. I mean, there's body horror in the Olympia act. There's, sex and maybe even pansexual things going on in the Giulietta act. And then there's this, very sincere Antonia act, which I think is the heart of the show. Yeah. And it's just like the duets in that just are...
Oh, that trio at the end with the mother's painting.
Yeah.
It was one of the first operas I really experienced as a kid because we had a terrible VHS recording of like one of the Met broadcasts from I think early 90s. And I watched that a lot as a kid without the context. I don't even remember who the singers are. I want to say James Morris was in it.
That sounds right.
It was
for some reason I thought your first opera was like Matisse de Mahler or something like that.
I mean, I wish if I could go back in time. show a younger me Le Grand Macabre, I'm sure I would have turned out even worse. Let's go to the 2-minute drill.
This just in. The 2-minute drill.
All right, listen up. Here's everything you need to know about what happened in Operaland this week.
With much of the opera industry struggling in Britain after staggering budget cuts, the Glyndebourne Festival has been insulated from true catastrophe due to its private funding. While Glyndebourne has been able to maintain the integrity of its mainstage festival season, the now second largest company in England has been forced to cancel its touring and educational programming. When we got the cut, the only solution was to cancel the tour. They killed it, and it was a great shame. It's very much the country's loss, said Executive Chairman Mr. Daniel Denise.
The past decade has hardly been smooth sailing for opera companies in the US either, but under General and Artistic Director Tomer Zvulun, Atlanta Opera's budget has tripled. With Tomer, a dam burst, said Mark Skorka, the chief executive of Opera America. Credit to him for channeling the energy in that city in the direction of a sound organizational plan and artistic variety to build a company that we see thriving today.
I got some major awards for you. The winners of the 2024 International Opera Awards, formerly known as the Hymens, have been announced. Friends of the show Lizette Oropesa and Benjamin Bernheim won Best Female and Male Singers, with Justin Austin and Arnheiður Eriksdóttir winning the Rising Star category. More Hymens in the talkback.
Friend of the show Jonathan Tettleman picked up the Gramophone Award, not to be confused with the Grammy, in the Voice and Ensemble category for his album The Great Puccini. Janacek's Katya Kabanova, starring Corinne Winters, conducted by Jakub Hrusza, won for Best Opera Recording, and Carolyn Sampson was named the Artist of the Year.
Tenor Piotr Bachawa announced on Instagram that he's been honored with the Medaglia d'Or del Gran Teatre del Liceo, classified into 7 categories: artistic, institutional, service or special dedication, philanthropy, patronage, dance, and composition. Liceo's gold medal is the company's highest distinction.
Deborah Lou Harder is being honored at tonight's New York City Gala for A Chance in Life, which supports kids in war-torn and impoverished places around the world. A Chance in Life is a charity that's been helping children in need for nearly 80 years.
Violinist and producer Johnny Gandelsman is the only classical musician among the 22 recipients of this year's MacArthur Fellowships. The $800,000 award, known as a Genius Grant, recognizes Gandelsman for his exceptional creativity and reimagining of classical works and nurturing the creation of new music across styles and genres. The only other recipient adjacent to opera is cabaret performer Justin Vivian Bond, who collaborated with friend of the show Anthony Roth Costanzo on Only an Octave Apart.
In trade news, Andres Rodriguez has been named as the new director of opera at Buenos Aires' Teatro Colón, where he will be responsible for future programming alongside general director Gerard Grieco.
And on this day, October 7th, first performances include André de Touche's Issei in Fontainebleau in 1697. Johann Adolf Hasse had 8 premieres on this date. In 1741, Numa Pompilio in Hubertusburg, Didone Abbandonata, also in Hubertusburg in 1742.
You'll get there eventually.
Arminio in Dresden, thank God, a different city, in 1745. Leucippio in that other city in Huberts in 1747. The Birth of Jove in H-Town in 1749. L'Errore Cinese, that sounds pretty racist, in H-Town in 1753. 2 years later, Il Re Pastore in that city in 1755. And in Warsaw, one for Poland, Il Sogno di Scipione in 1758. Whew, done with that. 1770 saw the first performance of Giovanni Paisiello's Le Trame per Amore in Naples. In 1828, it was Michele Carafa's La Violette in Paris. Another premiere in Paris in 1844, Adolphe Adam's Richard en Palestine. Uh-oh, that sounds dodgy. And it was a double bill, so the other opera was Cagliostro. In 1878, it's the first performance of Charles Gounod's Polyute in Paris. Gilbert and Sullivan's operetta Utopia Unlimited premiered at the Savoy in 1893. Victor Herbert's Mademoiselle Modiste in Trenton, New Jersey in 1905. Rimsky-Korsakov's The Golden Cockerel in Moscow in 1909. Also that year, Franz Lehar's Das Fürstenkind in Vienna. Wolfgang Erich Korngold had two premieres in 1927, Das Wunder der Helene in Hamburg, and in 1939, Die Katrin in Stockholm. That same year, 1939, saw the first performance of Darius Milhaud's Midday in Antwerp, and on this day, October 7th, in the year 2000, it was the first performance of Jake Heggie's Dead Man Walking in San Francisco.
And that is your 2-minute drill.
Just a little bit of the Artist of the Year, Carolyn Sampson, from an older album, that's Victorious Love, her Purcell collection. And we heard Now the Night is Chased Away from The Fairy Queen. I love me some Carolyn Sampson.
I do think that opera should always be pronounced as The Fairy Queen.
I think the name 5 Handel operas meme that we've had going now that George is gone is dead. Now we can change it to how many Hassa operas that were premiered on October 7th can you name? He had something going on in H-Town.
Trivia night. Yeah.
Hubertusburg.
Hubertusburg. That's not even a real city, is it?
No, that's fake. No one's heard of that. Don't come for us, Hubertusburgers.
You know what place we have heard of are Glyndebourne and Atlanta specifically. So these two stories were both in the New York Times this past week, and they were both mostly positive about, like, here are two opera companies that are not floundering as many around them are. And but even in both of those, there are points of, shall we say, contention. We can start a little bit with Glyndebourne.
Yeah, it's not all bloom on that rose. Shall we say.
Absolutely. So Glyndebourne is doing well. And the secret, basically is money. Unsurprisingly, Glyndebourne being sort of a country opera house that sort of bloomed out from the sort of almost private, performance into the juggernaut that it is, does not depend on public funding in the way that, say, the E&O does. And now, after the Arts Council England defunding of the past couple years, you now have a situation where it is currently the second largest opera company in England, which I believe is
in terms of performances, yeah.
Yeah. But even then, even with this access to private funding, you have a similar situation in the United States where it is not simply. It's not enough to just have, oh, wow, we have performances and we have an audience for them. They're going to come. But reaching out to those new audiences via touring is going to be impossible without state funding.
And what's especially frustrating about that is that the stated goal of Arts Council England is to spread the wealth of these great British cultural institutions. So it's unclear how they are going to, why their main tack to do that is to reduce the amount that places like Glyndebourne are able to take their art and bring it to the people where they are.
Yeah.
Instead they come up with these half-baked ideas like making E&O move to Manchester, which no one really seems to want or even be sure will work long term.
Yeah.
But these tours were very successful, and now they can't do them anymore because the funding that supported them is gone.
And these tours are so important. Tours in the United States are essentially dead, and they have been for a long time. But there was an era for much of the 20th century where if you were not next to a major regional opera house, you could depend on houses like the Met coming in and showing you an opera with big name singers and big budgets within a reasonable travel distance. And I think we tend to underestimate here in our sort of streaming age where we do have the live in HDs and things like that, how important those were, and I would argue still are, despite the fact that no one's doing them here in the US, because experiencing opera live on a stage is fundamentally a different experience. You know, I think the Live in HD is great. I think a lot more companies should be broadcasting on the internet for people to access and hear the music, but seeing it live is something else. And the culture around those traveling Met productions, you know, here's the segue here. You know, it kind of it laid the stage for the Atlanta Opera back in the 80s, because Atlanta didn't have a really big regional company for a long time. They just had the Met coming in. And you know, when that's gone, you miss it. And this is something that I really think is going to affect the future of opera in England, you know, 20, 30 years down the line.
On the Atlanta beat, I mean, Zachary Wolf calls out that, like, when the Met was touring down to Atlanta, they were able to fill those almost 5,000 seat houses.
Yeah.
So the appetite is there. And then, like, just as those tours were winding down, that's kind of when Atlanta Opera started getting up onto its legs.
Before we go to Atlanta, I just want to say that, you know, the content of the article doesn't really go well with the beautiful photo spread. I mean, if you're talking about like budget cuts and like how are we going to whatever make it to the next level, or how are we going to continue or whatever,
it is impossible to make a English country estate look impoverished, Oliver. I mean, you know, you're fighting a losing battle.
And well, they're taking their private funding and investing it in their house season. So the actual festival at the Glyndebourne house does not seem to be at risk as of yet. But it's like there's quite a bit of tonal whiplash in this article, because it's like, well, they're not really being ravaged like ENO was, but on the other hand, like, this is a significant cutback in like what they're able to actually offer their community outside of all of these Oxbridge elites, you know, gallivanting around.
It's lawn for as far as the eye can see. Over there, like green lawn.
Let's talk about Atlanta. Now, Atlanta I've talked about before. I think actually kind of recently. Longtime listeners will remember that Atlanta Opera was very much my large regional house, with air quotes, growing up. My first ever visit to Atlanta Opera was in 2002 when I was I think under 10 years old. I can't do the math right now. I went for a really long time, and there was a very strong tendency towards more conservative fare, more, I believe there, around the time I hit high school, there was actually a statement from, I believe, the general director at the time. It might have been the artistic director. I can't remember. That said specifically, we are going to focus on the war horses, the stuff that people know and like already. And I remember being really disgusted at the time and not going. I think it might have been the last time I went. But about the time I went to college, they hired Tomer Zvulun. And this very different vision of an opera company in Atlanta came into being. And this is really interesting, too, because their strategy has been very influenced by the pandemic. During the pandemic, they had to turn to alternative performance spaces. They did what they called like a big tent operas, where they literally did operas in tents, where the singers were all behind glass, wearing masks, mic'd up. They did like some unusual repertoire, Der Kaiser von Atlantis, stuff like that. Stuff that, you know, when I was growing up and seeing these conservative older audiences in Atlanta, I was not aware that that audience for that kind of opera existed. And in a lot of ways, it very much excites me that an opera company like that had, in my mind, so much inertia behind it, that to only do the top 20 operas, you know, and only that has really turned around, is very exciting. But even in this, you know, article, it points out that a lot of it does come down to money, and they might be cutting sort of, so they might be taking some of their savings, maybe a little bit out of their artists' paychecks.
Yeah, they're in quite a standoff with the musicians' unions right now, because the contracts expired last year, and I mean, no management of any opera company wants to be seen as like a pushover to the unions. Like, so there's always like a decent amount of chest thumping and any kind of press that comes up around union negotiations, because that's how you stake out your position. Yeah. And so, you know, there's always a little bit of like, how much behind this, like, is there actual animosity behind the scenes? Probably not, but it does seem like they're not necessarily being invited into the financial success in the same way that they probably deserve, given the fact that the musicians are the ones ultimately creating the opera.
International Opera Awards were handed out, the Hymens, as those of you know they used to be called.
Ick.
Yeah. I just want to highlight that, you know, there's not a lot of America represented here except for Lisette Oropesa and Justin Austin. But, you know, what are we going to do? Michael Spires is American, basically.
Basically.
Right? You know, his album won for Best Solo Recital, In the Shadows. I know you're a fan of Michael Spires. We got to get him on the show.
Do.
We do need to.
Yeah. But I'm happy about the Louise Bertin.
Me too.
Fausto recording.
I'm always happy for people to recognize the greatness of Benjamin Bernheim.
Yes, we stand. Other things that were awarded: new production of Iphigenie at Festival at Aix-en-Provence, co-produced by Greek National Opera. Sustainability Award went to Finnish National Opera. Who knows why? World premiere. Something you've already learned about, I'm sure. The Eötvös opera, Albaluska. You went right to Hungary.
Yeah, I wish I could. I would be. I love it, Fish.
Opera Company of the Year went to Komische Oper Berlin. Conductor went to Simone Young. Readers Award went to Arturo Chacon Cruz. Best Festival, Sabin Linna. Best Director, Christoph Loy. We don't have George Cedarquist to tell us why that's a good choice, but let's assume he has an opinion on that. Congratulations to all who were nominated, but you lost.
Let's wrap this show up.
Good call, bad call on Opera Box Score.
Good call, bad call. That's how we end the shows, as well as roasting nominees who didn't win. Let's start with Oliver Camacho.
You know, I didn't really talk about her because I had not heard her sing, but the Leonora production, the Pyre Leonora production at Chicago Opera Theater just closed. And Keely Fuderer, who sang the role of Marcellina, which is a much bigger role in the Pyre than it is in the Beethoven. I felt like every scene she was in, she stole it. Congratulations to her. Great actress, hilarious, voice for days. One of those really like bright, I don't want to call it edgy, but it's one of those voices like when she's singing, it's like, you know, she's singing, like it just like cuts through everything. And she was hilarious. I really loved what Larry Edelson did with her. So congratulations to the entire cast of Leonora, but especially to Keely.
Matt Cummings.
Throwing another congratulations in the ring, this time to Missy Mazzoli, whose new-ish opera, The Listeners, got a fantastic review from Alex Ross in The New Yorker in its new production at friend of the show, Philadelphia Opera. So congratulations, Opera Philadelphia, and Missy Mazzoli, and many, many future friends of the show, Alex Ross, maybe? We'll see.
That is it for this week's edition of America's Talk Radio show about opera. Make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts, get your voice heard, and find links to stuff we've talked about at our website, operaboxscore.com. And that's where you can put your money where our mouths are. Give back to the OBS using the Support the Team tab. Your announcer is Norm Waddell, your creative consultant is Oliver Camacho, and your audio editor is me. The executive producer of the OBS is George Cedarquist. For co-host Matt Cummings and guest Sinéad Campbell Wallace, I'm Weston Williams, asking you to continue the conversation about opera as you practice pronouncing H-Town. We're back with an all-new show next week when Ermolino Yaho takes a free throw on Madame Butterfly, we hope. Plus you get more opera headlines, more hot takes, and more hymens. Join us.